The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is the United Podcast Network.
Welcome to the Quirky Dog Podcast, inspired by some of the quirkiest dogs you can ever imagine and the owners who love them. This podcast is brought to you by the quirky couple themselves, Scott and Jess Williams. Their aim is to educate and entertain. Here's Scott and Jess.
Welcome, guys, and happy Wednesday. I'm super excited about our guest today. I have been following Dog Mom Mentality for some time, and we've coordinated, and we are actually having Karoline on the podcast here today, and we are going to get all into her journey and how she's helping and serving dog owners. But first, we're going to start with the quirky tip of the day. Good job, Pumpkin. All right, my quirky tip of the day today is I want you guys to check out Karoline's Growing and Healing Journal. You can find it on her website, Dog Mom Mentality, but it is like brilliant how it works you through different ways to kind of help like alleviate your stress, help your dog through some stuff, give you an actual plan of action. So please go and check that out on her website. It is an amazing tool to have, and it's not just like this loose prompt like, where are you starting? Where do you want to head? Like, it really guides you, and it has a lot of great psychological principles. So today we have...
I was going to say, not to be confused with the dog daddy.
Don't start. Dog Mom Mentality. We'll talk about him another time. All right. So we have Karoline Edmonds, and she is joining us from Kentucky. Karoline, thank you so much for coming on the show, and welcome. Can you just tell us a little bit about your background and how the heck you got here?
Yeah. So I am from Kentucky. I'm 25, will be 26 in May, and I actually work full-time as a software engineer. So if you can see anything in my background, that's like my actual work desk, my 9-to-5 stuff. But we got Layla in February of 2020, so right before the nasty pandemic hit. And my husband and I got her at the time. We were just boyfriend and girlfriend, but we quickly turned into pandemic life, so quarantine. So it was just us and Layla, and we were living at my mom's house. And we then moved into the house that we currently live in now, which is in more of a city. And as we started to do that, we realized that, Layla, looking back on it, Layla probably didn't have a lot of the socialization that she needed. She's a herding breed. We weren't very educated about some of the stuff that goes into having a high energy herding breed dog like that. And she started to have some reactivity and behavioral issues. And at the same time, I was going through a lot of transitions, which really skyrocketed my anxiety as well. So you kind of mixed an anxious girl dog owner with this like anxious, reactive dog, and we just butted heads a lot, honestly. And through our journey, through training her, through learning more about dog psychology and dog behavior and everything out there that you can just do to help them, I started to apply some of that to myself. So some of the things like how a dog can get over threshold or how a dog can have triggers stacked. And then, that kind of leads to some of the reactive behavior, or you're just teaching them to respond appropriately, right, to different stressors. And a lot of that I started to apply to my own mental health and my own anxiety. So that's one side of it. But then she just mirrored back so many things to me that I had never really been aware of, like how much my perfectionism really took a toll on everything that I did, and how I was putting pressure not only on me, but also on her at times, which led us down some roads of failure. But then also just like, dealing with burnout and dealing with guiltiness and comparison, and all of that came with being a dog owner. So really throughout this whole journey, I've experienced so many emotions, and I wanted to help others, or just make aware of it, not have it be such of a taboo topic, right? To talk about mental health in a way, and by talking about it through dog ownership, it became a little bit more relatable. Like people understood it a little bit better, and then it's kind of broadened my content to talk about more just general mental health topics, not just from a dog owner perspective. But I've always had this really big interest in mental health ever since growing up. I saw how people were stigmatized by having a mental illness, or going to see a therapist or needing to take medication, whatever. And for a long time, I saw that stigma and thought, well, I don't want to be like that because I don't want to be judged. And so it really caused me to mask a lot of my issues, a lot of my anxiety, especially, and then later on my depression. And it caused me to mask a lot of that and suppressed so much of it inside of me. But then whenever I started to be more open about it, whenever I got Layla, because that was kind of the first time that I ever talked about my anxiety publicly, even to like my parents and my friends, it just opened up this whole like healing journey for me to heal different parts of me. But it all wouldn't have happened if I didn't have Layla to put me through some of those challenges to begin with.
Yeah, 100%. And it's so often we just say like, oh, that dog's crazy. Oh, because Layla's a herding mix, so an Australian Shepherd mix or something, I think. Yeah. So super cute Blue Merle. She was in our YouTube thumbnail. But, we just so often pass it off like, oh, that dog's never going to get anything. And oh, that dog, was bred poorly. And oh, that dog. But actually working through your issues has been like life-changing for both of you in a certain way. And now you're helping other people. So it's a really important thing from our perspective, just the inspiration of like going through the shit actually makes things better on the other side,
Right. Right. Yeah. And I've come to realize like, first you have to be aware of it and then you have to like actually do something about it. And most of the time people just resist. And I felt like it was so much resisting from me in the first part. And then I was like, okay, like I have to deal with this. And then once I actually started leaning into it, all of these big realizations and overcoming certain things and being able to set boundaries with people and like all of this stuff just really came out of not resisting it anymore and actually getting into it with Layla, and then also just being aware of my own self, my own feelings, and then starting to work on that.
Yeah, 100%. So if you don't mind, just, you don't have to get real in depth, but just a little bit of tidbits for people out there, some ways that you did help her through stuff, just people out there that are struggling, that are like, oh my God, like I'm in this situation. They're probably like welling up hearing about it right now. What were some types of tools or like ways or techniques or whatever that you had gotten from point A to point B, if that makes sense?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, from a training perspective, there was just so many. So with Layla, she was specifically fearful of skateboards, certain sounds, and like just certain objects. But skateboards was like a really big deal for us. And that's a pretty common one, which is why I throw it out there. And so she used to flee. So she wasn't the aggressive, barking, lunging. She was a fleer and would run the total opposite direction. And that was really embarrassing for me. And a lot of this kind of boiled down to I felt like a bad dog owner. I felt like she looked like a bad dog, therefore I looked like a bad dog owner. And I hated that. I hated that perception of me. And so that really drove a lot of my motivation at first. Kind of that like ego side of me drove a lot of the motivation, which is one of the things that I ended up working past. But so she would be super fearful of skateboards and a lot of different things, and her reaction was to flee. And so a lot of it was confidence building, desensitization, going super, super slow, which is something I had a really hard time with because I felt like, oh, she should be getting it by now. Let's move on to the next step. And it was like, no, I really had to learn how to listen to her, listen to what she was going through, what she needed or what she was doing, to be able to tell when to actually move forward with our training. And so a lot of that was confidence building and desensitization. On the flip side, there was one point, and this was what really sent us over the edge, was that she became aggressive in her crate. So whenever we would go to close the crate door, she would start barking, lunging, snarling, kind of these like more aggressive behaviors. And that was whenever I decided like I really need to get into training. I really need to figure out what's going on, because there was at one point that we thought we were going to have to rehome her because it had gotten so bad and it had just sent my anxiety through the roof. So with that was a whole training protocol to, be able to get her used to the crate again, because up until this point, she was fine. There was a certain incident that happened that I think kind of like flipped it for her. So then we had to go back to relearning this positive association with the crate, relearning to go in there and lay down. But it was specifically whenever we would go to close the door. So she had this very aggressive reaction to us closing the door. And that was super, super hard on me to be able to manage my emotions in that setting while she was reacting. You know what I mean? It was like not reacting to her reacting, right? And so much of that I've ended up applying to my everyday life. You know, I might be talking to somebody and they might get defensive, and I have to take a second and sit so that I don't get defensive myself to them getting defensive. But, you know, for the actual owner side of it and my emotions and my feelings, like I said, first step is always awareness, and then moving on from that into actually doing something about it. But part of that is being able to label like what you are feeling, what exactly is it that is making you anxious, stressed, frustrated, and then being able to actually sit with those feelings long enough to figure out what to do about them. And for so long, it was more of just a reaction myself. You know, she would bark at the squirrels, I would get mad, and then I would yell, or I would do whatever. I would, you know, try to block her from the window, and it was just this very quick reaction. And I had to more so start being proactive instead of reactive. But it definitely took a lot of time of me just like sitting with my feelings and then figuring out what could I do instead, or how could I make this a better situation, or how could I be more proactive and set us up for more success. And a lot of that I did through journaling. So then that is why I created the Growing and Healing Journal, to help owners label their emotions first off, and then go through different guided prompts to, you know, process what they were feeling. So the journal is broken down into 4 different sections, but the beef of it is really this actual guided journal, and it covers 10 different emotions. So 5 more good and 5 more bad. So the bad ones are like frustrated, guilty, unmotivated. And those really walk you through like processing your feelings, getting your mindset back into a good place, you know, kind of getting over that comparison. And then the good ones are more about like reminiscing, feeling proud of yourself. Like that would be brave, motivated, vulnerable, joyful. And those are kind of, you know, for the days that you had a really good walk and you've been working so hard to like get to that good place. Now you want to think about it and reminisce and have that in a spot. And so it's there for you whenever you do have a bad day again, and you can go back and look at it. But a lot of this processing and figuring out, you know, what is the actual triggering thing for me? Because, you know, it's not Layla running in the opposite direction whenever she saw the skateboard. It was that she seemed like a bad dog, therefore I seemed like a bad dog owner. And that questioned my perfectionism. You know what I mean? So it really came all back to that, like being aware of it, sitting with the feelings, seeing what is actually bothering me at its core kind of thing. And so I really did a lot of that with journaling. But those were kind of like the high level steps that it took to get to the place of where we are today.
Yeah, completely. And Scott says all the time, like, just getting owners to be present is really difficult.
Right.
Just being, I mean, your self-awareness is very admirable, and your desire to actually work through this stuff, because the way I look at it, you know, I'm going out and seeing new people at least, you know, half a dozen times a week. I'm seeing a new dog owner and the dog training part of it is pretty simple. This is not rocket science, you know, but helping them become more present, more aware of what's going on, less reactive to what's going on, not taking it personal. I sat with, excuse me,
that's a big one.
I had a pit bull yesterday that has bit the owners repeatedly, and the dog had aggression in the crate. Like putting that dog in the crate would create a battle. I mean, these husband and wife were both, they told me that there were times when they were crying. They were just both crying about it. It was so intense and so upsetting. And I said, listen, you're taking it personally. You know, it's obviously upsetting to have aggression issues. But I was able to work them through a lot of stuff, and we were able to get the dog in the crate, and they felt so much better. But I get triggered with Jess. We have, and now, excuse me, when I do get triggered by her, I have to pause. And, you know, I am way more self-aware of it now than I was in the past. But I know, okay, why am I feeling this way? What's going on in me that's creating this defensive reaction to her and what she said.
I don't know how I can be very triggering. I think I'm pretty
Well,
perfect.
and the reality is it has nothing to do with you.
That's what I was going to ask.
It's bringing up something from my past.
Yeah.
Maybe my mother, maybe my dad was making me feel like a piece of crap somehow. She might say a phrase that subconsciously tapped into something else, but I just got to work through it. And it's funny because I initially got involved with dogs to escape my life. Because my work life was very intense, and it was my outlet to go train dogs and get into dog sports. That was my fun. But what it did was it confronted me with my life. It made me see who I am. So in the beginning, it was like, oh, I'm going to get away from all this stress and just deal with this dog. And here I am getting stressed with my dog. And then my dog is teaching me about all the work I need to do on myself, you know? And you can either choose to work on yourself and become a better dog owner, dog trainer,
dog person,
yeah,
or you can just blame the dog and not ever make yourself better and get another dog, and it doesn't work with that dog either, and you can have 5 dogs and it never gets better, and it's always the same problem because it's not the dogs, it's how you're interacting with the dogs. I mean, one of the biggest things we deal with is anxiety in dogs. These dogs a lot of them don't come with anxiety. They get the anxiety because, and I say to the people, in a non-judgmental way, I say, you know, they say, oh, the dog is so anxious. And I say, well, is there anyone in the household? Do you guys have much anxiety? And oh, yeah, they very quick. Yeah, I have all kinds of problems. Okay, well, that's good to know. Let's think about how that's bleeding into the dog's life now. And the dog is reflecting all this stuff that you're walking around with, you know. So it is a great opportunity for people to heal themselves if they're willing, if they're courageous enough to take a look at themselves and say, yeah, I got issues and I want to work through them. I want to be a better person for myself, for my dog, for my spouse, for my kids. And the dog can be an incredible journey. And the more difficult the dog, the more rewarding the journey can be. You know, but you got to suck it up and work through it, you know, and deal with this stuff.
Yeah,
you know?
and kudos to you for hitting the journey so early in life, because I'm telling you, it really does change a lot of perspective.
When I was 25, I just drank. I'm not dealing with this crap. I'm going out.
Yeah. But you really summed up like a lot of, you know, what I went through with Layla and what I'm continuously going through.
Sure.
Just in your little
Scotty spiel.
Spiel there. Yeah, you really summed up a lot of it because, you know, even so much from like you were working with your client on the crate, and it was like, I went through that. I feel that. We were crying too at times.
Yeah.
And, you know, it took a lot for me to detach myself from that. And for a really long time, I just released a podcast episode about this, but, you know, whenever Layla would have these reactions, especially in her crate, and she would bark back at me, I would lose my mind. I would lose my shit. I don't know if I'm allowed to cuss, but
wait,
I would lose
we're big swears. Okay. We're like sailors on the show.
I would lose my shit.
Yeah.
I would be crying myself. And, you know, at one point I thought, if I can't handle a dog barking at me, how in the world am I ever going to be able to have kids that, you know, may call me stupid or say I don't know what I'm talking about? And
well, you can put an electric collar on kids.
And it took me a really long time to like get past that, to be able to detach myself from it and like not take it so personally. And even with her crate. So long story short, we had a horrible landlord at one time, and she would come over unannounced. And there was one time that I had to hurry up, go shove Layla in her crate so that she wouldn't be out whenever the landlord came in. And I think there was one of those times that I did that, and I was a anxious ball of anxiety at that time, and or a ball of anxiety at that time. And I think all of that put together is what triggered her to have this negative reaction to putting her in her crate from that point on. And so, you know, it did take a lot of like me controlling my own anxiety. And, you know, even on the walks, I like to say that, like my anxiety can add to her anxiety, right? But like, I don't think my anxiety caused her to be fearful of skateboards.
No, of course not. Yeah, no, of course
not.
And so, of course, the more intelligent the dog, the more readily they're going to be having their own thoughts too.
Right,
like, you know,
right. So like, even though,
And my dogs were all smarter than me, and that was the problem in the beginning.
Yeah.
Let her go.
Same. Layla can pick up on patterns like no other. But like, if I was anxious putting her in her crate, it was more likely that she was going to react because she was picking up on all of that, like how you were saying.
Yeah. I do want to ask you, and Scott kind of touched on it, so he gave the prelude there, but as you went through your journaling journey and everything else, how much of the journal was actually about her, and how much like did it kind of go back to your like day-to-day life or other shit? Does that make sense? Like, do you know what I like? Did other stuff like come up through all of that?
Right. Yeah. So are you talking about while creating the journal?
No,
or
like while you were going through your
journaling?
journaling and your healing and like trying to work through it, like did you notice like stuff popping up that really had nothing to do with the dog sometimes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Especially like the perfectionism and the people pleasing. Those are the two really big ones that it kind of boils down to a lot. So, one of it being I can't control every situation, and I can't control her, and I can't control her reactions. And I grew up an only child, very independent. I was a go-getter, would just do everything until it was done, and I wouldn't take breaks.
Yeah.
And that was so hard with her because like she would control the situation as well. And like she wasn't ready to move on to the next step of getting used to the skateboard.
Yeah.
And that drove me nuts because I wanted to get it done as soon as possible so we could move on with our lives. And, then things started popping up where I would notice the same kind of pattern happening. Or I would be looking back on old things and kind of notice that same pattern and be like, crap, well, there it is again.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And same thing with people pleasing. I really, really struggle with people pleasing and hate disappointing people. And so for a really long time, it was really hard for me to set boundaries or tell Layla, no, you know what I mean? Not to do something. Or just even set up like physical boundaries, right? For her to not go into the kitchen or whatever. And I realized that it kind of came back to my people pleasing, that I wanted her to just be able to do whatever she wanted and be happy, and learned that did not set us up for success at all. So I had to learn how to set boundaries with her. And by gaining confidence in that, I was able to start setting boundaries with other people in my life. So boundaries are cool.
Yeah, no, kudos to you for that.
Now
sure.
your husband sleeps in the guest room.
Well, this is the guest room. There's no bed in here. So
There's proof.
it's either our
There's
bed
proof.
or the couch.
So you talk a little bit about being like a recovering perfectionist. And I know that this is part of your like journey and stuff now, but I mean, as women, as only children, as dog moms, whatever, like this perfectionism, this people pleasing thing is kind of like just a common trend that I even see with our clients. So what are some things now that like, when you're like, oh my God, I want that to be better than it is, or like you kind of have like this urge, like how do you work through that kind of stuff now? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, that's a really, really good question. So I feel like I've been on this kind of like my hot topic right now is like taking breaks before I actually need them. And taking those breaks, like scheduling in those breaks, has really helped me to kind of like take a step back and realize that I can't control everything. Not everything can be perfect. And that has really helped me to get over some of those perfectionistic ways, because for a long time it was just like, go, 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 do until it's done.
Yeah.
And if I had to, I'm a software engineer. Right now I'm working on a piece of code, and like, I just want to keep going until it's done. And if that means me sitting at my desk for 12 hours, then I'll do that. But even my husband's constantly reminding me to take breaks and how I'm so much better if I take breaks. And I'm like, still wanting to fight that, right?
Yeah.
And but yeah, kind of like intentionally scheduling in those breaks has been really helpful, because it's given me time to sit down, reflect, and kind of like put me in my place, because now that I'm aware of it, I'm able to talk myself out of going till it's perfect. But a lot of it too is, I said intentional breaks. A lot of it is being really intentional about choosing what I put my energy towards too. Right. Yeah. So like, for instance, work or school might be a better one, because, I always try to do my best at work because I'm getting paid for it.
Yeah.
But like at school, I wanted to have all A's all the time. And I practically killed myself over that. And looking back, I wish I would have taken intentional breaks and put my energy somewhere else so that maybe the grades weren't all A's and weren't perfect in air quotes, but the life I was living was more perfect. You know what I mean? More fulfilling, more intentional. I was getting to spend time with my friends more, or I was getting to spend time with my husband more. Whatever it was, you know what I mean? But I was so focused on outside standards that I put all of my energy towards that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And kind of the same way, like I said, I saw Layla as an extension of me for a really long time. So I put all of my energy towards Layla. And that's when I started to see some depression, the side effects of myself, because I wasn't really taking care of myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is easy to just suck everything into the dog and just make it all about the dog, and then you're ignoring yourself. So I love that. So take breaks and then be intentional with where you're giving your energy. I like both of those. And I'm going to add to the perfectionist thing, and then I'll let Scott touch on the people pleasing, because Scott is far from a perfectionist. I love him, but he does not have that type A.
We're the balance.
Yeah, he does not have that type A OCD personality. And I'll just say, from part of like being an influencer, if you will, we're all out here doing podcasts. Also, Karoline has this great podcast, Dog Mom Mentality. You can hear she has a super sultry voice, but she gives great content and she has a great podcast. But
this isn't an OnlyFans website.
Stop it. Don't start. But putting yourself out there, in a public way, you're going to get criticism, right? Like, you're going to have some people that are going to make nasty comments or say things. And one thing that I've kind of developed, because I want to like be as good as I can be and put the best product out there as possible, I just laugh. Like, I laugh at myself, right? Just making it like off the cuff, like, well, whatever. That's how you feel. That's okay. I'm going to move on with myself. And some of that is that intentional energy directing that you talked about. But some of it also is just like, make it more lighthearted. It isn't life or death. You know what I mean? And I just want you to touch on like people pleasing, because you're a big one. Like, you want all your clients to be happy and everything else. Like, what are some ways that you cope with that?
Yeah, well, I mean, getting back to you laughing as it relates
that happens all the time.
As it relates to dog training, when your dogs fail, when you're teaching them something, you are quick to laugh and make it light and do it over again. Where I'll take it more personally. Yeah. Like, oh, the dog should know this by now. I've done this so many times, and I've been working with this dog for 8 years, and that shouldn't be happening. But I think that bringing that lightheartedness to dog training,
that's true. That's
is
a good
a
one.
Great way to move forward without the dog thinking, oh shit, this isn't fun. I did something wrong. Mom's mad. All that stuff. So that's not good. But as far as the people pleasing, what comes to mind with me? Of course, with my clients, I want them to be happy. I tend to negate all the good testimonials. Like, when someone says, oh, you helped me so much, it's like, well, I'm glad, thanks for letting me know, whatever. But when someone says, oh, I didn't feel like, it was as productive, or anything negative, or even if they have to cancel an appointment, but they don't give me a good excuse, they're like, oh, did I do something wrong? Are they upset? Was it me? And, that kind of thing. But on the other side of that, thinking about me personally and the people pleasing, I also have that curse of wanting everyone to be happy all the time. And if they're not, it has to be a reflection of something I did. It's not about, it's not about them and their craziness. It has to be something that I contributed to them not being happy. But when I first started training and I got into these protection sports, and I saw some brutal training, some things that did not make me feel good. But I didn't say anything about it because I didn't want anyone to think I wasn't, they were all much better trainers than me. I was newer. I'm like, well, this must be the way they do it. But things really bothered me. And if I had a little more self-esteem, a little more self-worth, I would have said, hey, I don't want to be a part of this. If this is what you guys do, that's fine. I don't want to be a part of it. But I went through those things, going to different places and doing things and staying in some places longer than I should have and not speaking up. And I think about that sometimes in my past when I think about different places I went where the training was harsh and not saying anything. And by not saying anything, you're accepting it, or you're, you know what I mean? You're just, that means it's okay. You're watching it, you're there, and it's not right. It's like if people can't, if everyone is stopping training because someone drove by the training field because they don't want people to see what's going on. There's a problem there. You shouldn't be there. You know what I mean?
Well, that's
but
good.
Just a side note.
That's a good baseline of like having a boundary and speaking
Yeah.
up. Yeah.
I mean, I'm different now, and I don't. There's certain things I don't even participate in anymore because I don't like the way the training goes. But I don't know with my customers what I would say.
I think focusing on the good is a good one. Like not allowing yourself to go down these negative cycles and everything else.
Right.
And I just think it's important to touch on these things because like the dogs are an extension of us so much, like you've mentioned, and like how can we best help them? And then while we're best helping them, we're best helping ourselves. You know what I mean? So like your whole like platform and everything you're heading towards is just awesome as far as I'm concerned. What are your future goals? Like where do you want to head? Like what is your why in dogs? All of this BS.
Oh, that's such a good question. But like you said, what is my why in dogs? It's like really all back to the like mental health of people, right? Yeah. So honestly, dogs is just a way for me to talk about it in a very relatable, understanding way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's been this like really great vehicle because I've been able to reach this huge audience that we all share this like common problem that our dog reacts and our dog frustrates sometimes, or like even just our dog steps in their own shit and we already had a bad day. And so that just sent us over the deep end. Right. And that happened to us last night. We kept calling Layla poopy foot. But, whatever it is, it's like this common thing of like something has happened with our dogs and like we had to work through it emotionally. And that goes from puppy blues all the way up to your dog is really sick in their old age. You know what I mean? And so much of that. But really what it comes down to is that I've always wanted to make an impact in the mental health, emotional intelligence space and increase empathy and emotional intelligence, like just across the board. Like whether you say, just a group of 10 people or a group of 10,000 people, it doesn't matter. Ever since I saw somebody from a young age get or be misunderstood due to the stigma around mental health, and they were going through a lot of anxiety and depression, and, people just weren't really giving them support. They weren't trying to be understanding. They weren't even taking the time to be knowledgeable about what they were going through on like a medical level or just like a human level, because they were obviously struggling. Right. Yeah. And ever since I've seen that, I've first went into it like, oh, well, I never want to be like that person because I never want to be judged or I never want to be unsupported. But then once I started having my own kind of mental health battles, it turned into, I want to make this impact so that people understand more, so that people have more empathy, so that people have a wider knowledge. And sometimes that impact is just on myself. Like anytime that I have an awareness moment, I'm like, oh, I've did my job today because I made an impact on myself. Yeah. But then, there are days that something on Instagram reaches 10,000 people. I'm like, yes, I did my job today. I was able to talk about this topic that I'm so passionate about, and it reached X amount of people. So really it all goes back to this increasing emotional intelligence, empathy, and awareness to society. And at the end of the day, it doesn't actually have to do with dogs. It's just a really great vehicle.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I do want to give a shout out to people who are listening that are like, hey, I'm pretty stable in my own right. A lot of kids now are struggling, like as they're growing up, like dealing with stuff and everything else. And a lot of parents that have kids that are struggling and dogs that are struggling, it's like just stress combined. You know what I mean? Like it's just accentuated to this next level. So even if you yourself feel like, Scott and I do like cold baths, we meditate, like we do all kinds of crazy stuff for our mental health. If you feel like I'm in my own right and I take Bikram and I'm good and everything else, things that like you're talking about on your podcast and stuff could help the children and can help the dogs and the children in the house and can help everyone just kind of grow into more like authentic healing as early on as possible, because the dogs do heal us. The bottom line is like, if you're listening to your dogs, like they're going to help you be better people,
Well, right. At the very least, they're going to be a mirror and they're going to show you how fucked up you really are. You can choose, you can choose to improve yourself and work on yourself, or this dog is going to keep reminding you that you got some problems, buddy.
Yeah, and it's true.
Right.
And it's the same thing in our house. Like, I'll be like, hey, babe, your dog's being anxious. Like, it's not like it means that like, oh, we all have gotten to this other side and, our dogs are just perfect. But it is just a good way to like check back in with ourselves. They're labeled man's best friend, woman's best friend, whatever, because they do help us. Like they do help us to heal and they help us to look. So definitely check out the podcast, the healing journal, the Growing in the Healing Journal on your website. Anything else that we've missed?
No, I think, well, actually, I did want to say one thing. So, there was a time that people would criticize about what you feed your dog, how you play with your dog, how you train your dog. There was even one time that somebody said that if you tug with your dog is going to be aggressive. Yeah. And I remember somebody commented that on my video and I was like, this is definitely not making her aggressive, but you get those comments, right? And it was all like, oh, you're a bad dog owner. You don't know what you're doing. And so I made the shirt that says bad dog mom on it to kind of like
just own it. Yeah, just own it. Yeah.
Embrace it and laugh at it. So that's also available on my website.
Okay, great. So you have the store and you guys
be a bad dog mom.
God forbid. And your Instagram, you are like a full-on Instagram influencer. So check her out. She has great content and that's Dog Mom Mentality, also your handle, correct? Mm-hmm. All right, great. Do you have anything else to add?
Well, I just really appreciate your emotional maturity at 25 because I can identify with everything that you're talking about, but I was not emotionally mature enough until I was well over 50, honestly. I just felt, the way I was raised, I just felt as though mental health problems were mostly just weakness. And this is just the way I was raised. And unless you were, a complete psychopath or something, you had to be very extreme for it to actually be a real illness. And it took a while for me to really come to terms with my own mental problems, emotional problems, accept them, work through things, and then have much more empathy for even the homelessness situation. Whereas I used to think of them, well, go get a job. There's plenty of jobs out there. It's not, if it were that easy, it wouldn't be such a huge problem in this country right now. There's a lot going on in the world. A lot of people need help. And I'm just very grateful that I'm able to keep my own life together enough to live indoors and have some great dogs and pay my bills and help people when I can, how I can.
Yeah, and that's so true. You even brought out more empathy in my husband than most people ever do. So that's so good. But this underlying theme of empathy, let's be empathetic towards all dogs, all owners, everyone struggling. Let's show them some love rather than get on these videos and criticize and be like, if you were doing this or if you weren't using this tool or if this, just let's show empathy. We're all doing the best we freaking can out there. And ideally, we're all a community of dog lovers. So thank you for supporting the community of dog lovers.
You can't show empathy if you don't have any for yourself.
That's true.
You got to give yourself a little break first.
Yeah, give yourself some grace.
True.
Give yourself some grace. Thank you so much for joining us today, Karoline.
Yeah,
I hope everybody checks out
thank you.
This journal, the podcast, the Instagram, everything she's offering. I'm really pumped about it. And in the meantime, take care of your mental health and keep it quirky.
Thanks.
Take care, guys.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.